Okay, I took the time over break to do something I probably should have done earlier, which was to do my own assignment and to work through the speech analysis steps that I have been asking you to follow. So, as a result of that, I want to first give you some suggestions regarding formatting, to give you some direction and explanation and support as you analyze figurative language, and then to help you think about how to move from these steps towards a claim that will be the foundation of your essay. So, first, let me talk about formatting. I would say probably my number one realization at first as I work through these steps is that when I give this assignment again, I can be clearer in giving you a format for I specifically for identifying images in figurative language, because one of the things that I quickly realized in doing this is that many of the images in the speech are actually not literal things, not describing literal things that we see, but they're actually part of figurative language. So my initial plan was to highlight images in one color and figurative language in another, and I quickly realized that there's so much overlap that I needed a way to identify which of them were like literal images, and which of them were images that had some figurative or metaphorical meaning. So I'm sorry for not making that clearer on the front end, but wanted to say if either of those things were things that you did not do clearly or thoroughly on your steps, this would be my recommendation, to have a way that you identify images that includes both literal and figurative ones, and then a way that you designate which one of those are parts of figurative language. So those are my thoughts on formatting. Then, spending a little bit of time on figurative language, the things that I asked you to do here were, first of all, to find it, which I recognize is difficult in Shakespeare because all of the language is so complex that figuring out what is literal and what is figurative when you don't even know what some of the words mean is especially challenging. So I just want to preface my comments here by saying that this is hard. And I want you also to read my examples with the lens of I have been living with this play for almost a decade and a half. So what you're seeing here is the fruits of my repeated exposure to and analysis of this play. I am not expecting your analysis to be on that level, but I wanted to give you a model of what it looks like to really unpack some of the figurative language. So what is least important here is telling me what kind it is. I think the skills that I want to see that you're able to do are to figure out when something is being said and not meant literally, to figure out what is being compared to what, not for the purpose of writing an essay where you just identify all of that, but then to say, like, what is the meaning and the effect of this comparison? So I think the one thing that was missing here in my directions was meaning, and I ended up going back to a bunch of my comments and adding that in. So if that is helpful to do for you, you are welcome to do that. And again, even though figurative language is kind of the skill that we're focusing on in this unit, it may not be the most important part of the speech that you're analyzing. So I am not anticipating that all of your essays are going to be talking at length about figurative language. But just to help you kind of practice the skill of identifying and analyzing it, I'm giving you some additional explanation and guidance here. So let me just walk you through a couple of the ones in this speech. So, first of all, we have this word fust, not a word that we use. It means become moldy, according to the side notes. And so this is a metaphor. Hamlet is not talking about anything literally becoming moldy. And again, this is where we need to first understand the language to then realize that it's not being used literally. So what he is describing here, and it took me a couple of tries to figure out what this tenor is, because first I was saying the tenor is, oh, become moldy. That's actually the meaning. The meaning is decay from lack of use. But the thing that Hamlet's describing when he's talking about something fusting in him is what happens to reason, and here he's wondering about his own reason when people don't use it. So that the tenor is what happens. The meaning is that it decays, and the effect here is that Hamlet is worried that in not acting, he's neglecting his God-given abilities, and he's letting them just decay or rot away. So again, that takes a lot more unpacking than use of figurative language in a poem that has language that we're more familiar with. So let's do one more that's a little bit complex, then we'll look at an easier one. So here, this is a metaphor. Hamlet is not talking about Fortinbras' spirit literally being puffed up. But so the vehicle here is puffed. What he's describing is how ambition is affecting Fortinbras' spirit. And then the meaning is that that ambition is inflating or inspiring it. Like literally, inspire means to breathe into. So this idea of the divine breathing into him, and the effect of that is his ambition. So I think this could go in two ways. From the context of the speech as a whole, I think that Hamlet is admiring Fortinbras' courage in leading his army to gain glory. The puffed kind of has a negative connotation, though, so I'm also wondering if there's a little possibility of critique, this idea of puffed up or overinflated, that Hamlet is kind of wondering, like, well, dude, you are ambitious, but you're leading your army to die for a piece of worthless land, so sure, that's ambitious, but ultimately not the most productive thing. So I think from the overall tone of the speech, it's more likely that this is coming from a place of admiration than a place of critique, but I think it's interesting that that other layer of meaning is there. Okay, let's talk about something that we all understand, which is sleep. So here, the vehicle is letting everything sleep. Nothing is literally sleeping here. So Hamlet is talking about what he is doing. And what this means is that he's not taking action. And once again, he is castigating or criticizing himself for not having the motivation to take action. Or sorry, for having the motivation and still not taking action. I think it could also kind of reference something he says earlier in the speech about bestial oblivion. That when we aren't living up to our godlike capabilities, we're kind of living in a way that is more in touch with our physical or animal natures than our divine capabilities. Okay, let me do one more before we move on to talking about how you move from all of this towards a claim. So, eggshell. There's not a literal eggshell here. No one is fighting over an actual eggshell. But what the meaning of the eggshell is something fragile and insignificant, but what Hamlet is describing is the army's reason for fighting. So Fortinbras' reason for engaging in this battle is for something so insignificant as to be comparable to an eggshell. And so this shows Hamlet developing this contrast. He's saying, this is a lot like Hamlet's comparison of himself to the player who's grieving over Hecuba, and Hamlet's like, he's grieving over Hecuba. He doesn't even know her. My father died. I'm doing nothing. So here he's saying Fortinbras is risking everything for this worthless piece of land just to claim it for Norway. Hamlet has a much greater and more personal cause for action, and he's not doing anything. He is not embracing the level of risk that Fortinbras is doing. So I hope that's helpful just in working through how to analyze the figurative language, and I think also demonstrating for you how complex it is, that a lot of these, I went back and changed all of these to realize that what I had said was the tenor was actually the meaning. So the tenor is the thing that's being described. The vehicle is what is the language that you're going to see in the speech. The tenor is what it's referring to. The meaning is what it's saying about that thing. And the effect is what it shows us about the speaker and their attitude or perceptions or things like that. Okay, so taking everything that you've done in looking at your speech so far, what I am not asking you to do is to put all of this into an essay. That would be informative, but not super focused. So what I'm asking you to do is to respond to this claim. How does the speaker's language reveal his or her state of mind and or rhetorical purpose? You do not have to address both of those. I think some of your speeches are more someone expressing a state of mind. Some of them are intentional arguments trying to convince someone of something. So for example, Laertes' advice to Ophelia is not about Laertes' state of mind, it's about what he's trying to tell Ophelia to do. If you're looking at Hamlet's opening soliloquy in Act 1, that's not a rhetorical, it's not an argument that he's making, that's him expressing his feelings and perceptions at this point in the play. So, to kind of bridge the gap between everything that you've done so far and coming up with the claim. I'm going to introduce a way of looking at poetry a little bit more holistically and big picture that we're going to practice in our next unit at the beginning of next semester. So this is adapted from something that I learned in an AP workshop, and I kind of rearranged the different things that their method had you looking at, but starting out by just saying, what's the mood? So now that you've done all this analysis, that you understand the speech, what is the predominant mood? So you can see what I've said here about the mood of this soliloquy of Hamlet's. What are the tensions in the speech? So things that are in contrast, things that are being compared to each other, anything that's in tension, even ideas that aren't being explicitly compared, but they're opposites that are present in the speech. What's some of the notable language, like words or phrases that stand out, themes that you see in the language, striking images? Here I just talked about how a lot of Hamlet's metaphors come back to his criticism of himself. That was kind of a global observation about the language. And then what are the shifts in the speech, if there are any major shifts? So does it shift from a type of speaking? So here from observation to particular, from questioning to declaration. Does it shift in ideas or tone or anything like that? So that, I think, will help you just kind of bring together what you've observed and learned through looking at this speech, and that will give you some things to work with as you're drafting a claim. So what I did here is draft 3 separate claims in response to this. So I want to demonstrate for you that there isn't one right answer. There are certainly wrong answers, but there isn't one right answer for each of the speeches that you're analyzing. There are a number of different things that you could examine. So the main things that I'm going to be looking at in evaluating your claims is, first of all, are you getting what's going on in the speech? But then, is your claim saying what the speaker's language is doing? Something, not just saying the speaker's language reveals this. It's saying something about the how, right? How is the language doing this? And then what it reveals about the state of mind or rhetorical purpose. So I highlighted those things in my example claims just so you could see what that would look like. So one essay you could write, or I could write, might be looking at how Hamlet's language is contrasting himself with Fortinbras, and what that reveals in terms of his state of mind is his frustration at his failure to act. Another essay might look at the shifts and say, okay, so we start with observation, and then we go to questioning, and then we go to declaration. And what that reveals is kind of Hamlet's rhetorical purpose, that first of all, there's this contrast, and then that contrast leads to self-criticism, and then that leaves him to make this declaration of resolve at the end of his speech, which unfortunately is kind of an empty declaration. Saying that you're only going to think of revenge while you're on your way out of the country, not actually going to be super productive. Finally, another essay that I could write could be talking about the things that we see Hamlet wrestling with about the fact that man is both physical and spiritual, and that shows that what he's struggling with, and this is kind of a combination of state of mind and rhetorical purpose, what he's trying to figure out is he not using his reason enough, or is he overusing his reason, and that's leading to his lack of action. So again, all of those are essays that I could write about this speech, and maybe I will write one of them. Don't think that I will write all 3 of them. But that just shows you how you could go a couple of different directions in responding to this prompt. Okay, that was a lot, but I hope that is helpful just in giving you a little bit of guidance. First, overdue and apologies for the lack of formatting direction. Secondly, some explanation and further demonstration of what it looks like to unpack figurative language. And then finally, how to move from these poetry process steps to some generalized observations that will help you draft a claim for your essay.